All right, back to our top story again. Now, concerns of unrest flaring in Hong Kong over China's proposed national security law. Treason, secession, sedition and subversion would be banned. Pro-democracy activists are calling for mass protests against what they call the erosion of the city's autonomy. And even so, the Hong Kong government has said it will comply as soon as possible. And for a closer look, we're joined by Bernard Chan, convener of the Hong Kong Executive Council. Bernard, thanks for joining us this evening. So critics, they're now saying that this bill would actually be the end of Hong Kong's autonomy, Hong Kong as we know it. But Chief Executive Carrie Lam, now she's saying that it won't affect Hong Kong's freedom. How so?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that it has always been our constitutional obligation to pass the national security law. In fact, you can imagine, any country of any, of that nature would have to have a national security law. But for 23 years after Hong Kong returned to China, we never have the occasion to do so. In fact, we tried in 2003, but we failed. And so China has been, allowing Hong Kong, to have this, these piece of law being absent for all this time. But the event last year, the social unrest last year, basically give China no choice now. I mean, they have to step in, because I'm sure they understand that it's probably not likely that we can handle the passing of that bill in Hong Kong alone. So that's why they have to step in to make sure that their own national security is being secure, because they see this is now a direct threat to the sovereignty. So I think But again, I mean, if you look at from the business angle, I think business people actually don't see this as an issue, because none of the business people will have any attempt to subvert state power or treason of that nature. So I don't think it will actually affect the business sentiment. And it's always been part of our constitutional obligation. So it's not like we are doing anything differently. In fact, even you look at the proposed draft decision, the first thing that in Article 1, Chinese government, reiterate that the one country, two system remain. So they also want to make sure the two system continue as well, provided that national security is being protected.
But pan-democratic legislator Alvin Yeung has told us why he thinks Beijing is pushing for this bill. Let's hear him.
Judging from what happened since last year, obviously this is the solution from Beijing and Hong Kong governments towards the political unrest since last June. When Hong Kong people talk to the street, when Hong Kong people express our anger regarding the controversial extradition bill and also to police brutality, it seems like Beijing thinks they did not have a tough enough law. So they introduced this national security law in order to settle or to crack down the protests on the street in Hong Kong.
Yeah, so Bernard, pretty much what you were saying as well there.
Well, I think protest has always been part of Hong Kong culture. We always have protests in Hong Kong all these years. In fact, protests happen every week in Hong Kong, even before the social unrest. But what happened last year, though, is beyond just a protest or freedom of expression. Increasingly now we have now young people calling from Hong Kong independence from China. That is totally crossing the red line. So I think it's beyond just talking about freedom of expression. We're talking about secession and also foreign interference. Clearly, there were foreign politicians in Hong Kong during last year's protests in supporting some of these movements. So I think these are very troubling signs for Beijing to have this level of foreign interference, to the calling for independence of Hong Kong, and also perhaps even subverting the state power. I think these are the concerns that I think both. In fact, this is not just a Beijing concern. Even among people in Hong Kong, we are also concerned. So I think we have to separate protests, freedom of expression from national security.
Well, I want to pick up on what you mentioned there about state power as well, because Alvin also took issue with Hong Kong's Legislative Council being bypassed. Let's listen to what he had to say.
They basically bypassed the Legislative Council and introduced this new national security law and say I say it law, so this is law in Hong Kong. There's no consultation whatsoever, and we have no idea the details of the law because that is going to be passed by the National People's Congress Standing Committee, and no Hong Kong people, except one or two representatives, can scrutinize the bill in Beijing. And so the role of the Hong Kong legislature will be skipped.
So what's your opinion on that?
Well, obviously, I think this is not just an event that happened now. Beijing has waited for 23 years for us to pass this legislation for national security. And we have made one attempt, we failed, and it's been ongoing. And I guess they came to a decision that, there's no point of waiting any longer because I think the legislature is completely in filibustering. I mean, we took us 6 months just to elect a House committee chairman, or chairperson. So I guess they realize that this is they can't wait any longer, and so they have to protect the national interest as well. So yes, it is true that it will be in the hands of the standing committee of the MPC to decide the detail. But I'm sure whatever details will comply with the one country, two system, will comply with the basic law and the constitution as well. Because after all, it has to be both be acceptable to Hong Kong as well. I mean, to the people of Hong Kong as well. So I mean, yes, it will be more ideal that this bill would be scrutinized at our local legislature. But 23 years was way too long, I think, for central government to wait. So I guess, give him really no choice to have to do this.
Bernard, you mentioned the one country, two systems. One common criticism is that this bill breaks China's promise to uphold that one country, two systems. Here's Alvin again with his thoughts.
By introducing or basically to impose a national law that is specifically designed for Hong Kong and put it to Hong Kong and say, you have to take it, you basically have no choice, that is ruining the one country, two system and basically the reputation of Hong Kong. That will not do Hong Kong any good. It will only harm Hong Kong's status as an international financial center, and to a lot of people, that is the beginning of the end of one country, two systems.
Yeah, but what's your thoughts on this and how China sort of squares this?
Yeah, first of all, that power always has laid with the central government, but they empower Hong Kong to do so. But we fail to deliver that national security law. Yes, I mean, it is not the most ideal, but then given what happened to last year unrest, which is actually even more damaging for one country, two systems. I think once and for all, if this bill is being passed, this law being passed, if we can somehow manage to return the city back to normality, I think things will return to normal. I think last year was totally an event that no one would like to see to happen again. So I think given that the issue now, we are really putting we have we obviously have now trade war. We have there was a trade tension between U.S. and China, and things really got complicated a lot. And given the COVID-19 as well, I think the national security law is actually perhaps by far the most important issue for China to consider right now.
Bernard, well, let's look at the chief executive, the person who's supposed to govern Hong Kong, Carrie Lam. She has come under much criticism for what's happening now. Let's listen to what Alvin also has to say about this.
What happened to Carrie Lam and her administration, and what happened to Beijing? Any people with a common sense would know that what happened since last year is a reflection of poor governance. But this government and Beijing, they lack self-reflection. They thought probably that they did not have a tough enough law, so they introduced something tougher. But obviously that is a wrong answer to this unrest. And we are disappointed, and of course, this is not going to help the situation. It will only provoke more people.
Bernard, do you agree?
Well, sadly, I have to say, Alvin is perhaps should be also responsible for what happened to Hong Kong today. I mean, the legislature is a complete standstill. Things are not moving forward for Hong Kong. I think obviously he represents the opposition party, but I think he has to put Hong Kong interests first. But unfortunately, over the last year or two, he's not helping to let Hong Kong decide on these sort of issues. I mean, Beijing has let Hong Kong to decide for this piece of legislation for a very long time, but somehow, we just never come to that this agreement among ourselves. What sort of protection we need to be in place, not just for Hong Kong, but for the interests of China. So it's unfortunate that China has to come through this particular method, which they're entitled to, by the way. They're not breaching any law. They're entitled to, but it would be far more ideal that this piece of legislation could be legislated in Hong Kong. By the way, that is still Article 23 of the Basic Law remain in force. So when this piece of legislation now being passed in Beijing will still require Hong Kong to continue to the enactment of Article 23. So it's not like we can just simply avoid it. We still have to address it in due course.
Bernard, one last question for you, and your thoughts on how the markets are sort of reacting to this and the outflow of capital. Do you think that's going to continue?
I think that is perhaps short term, because I think people weren't sure exactly how this will play out in Hong Kong, whether there will be more escalations of violence. So I think that is probably a short term. But I think in the longer term, I think once this piece of legislation has been passed, perhaps, honestly, as I said, how many people in Hong Kong is actually interested in subverting state power? I think by and large, majority of Hong Kong people will not be affected by this bill. So I think once people recognize that the actual impact is not as big as some of those who claim, especially if one country, two system remain as strong, I think the market will return to normal. So I think this is just a short-term reaction, which is totally understandable.
Well, indeed, lots of debate on this security bill. But thank you so much, Bernard, for coming and speaking to us this evening and sharing your thoughts. Bernard Chan, convener of the Hong Kong Executive Council.